Hey guys, tonight we slip softly into the blistering, sun-baked halls of ancient Egyptian justice, where the air tastes like sandstone, and regret and justice move slower than a tortoise-hauling limestone. You're standing barefoot on warm mud brick flooring, surrounded by painted pillars, dodging the bored gaze of a temple cat that clearly outranks you. The scent of frankincense clings to your nose, and behind you, someone's whispering about grain rations. Oh yes, it's trial day. The court scribe eyes you with a practiced blend of exhaustion and amusement. His reed pen hovers over the papyrus sheet like it's waiting to decide your fate before the judge even opens his mouth. One wrong answer, and you'll be building pyramids from the inside out. You probably won't survive this, but hey, it'll be historically accurate. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from and what time is it there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge into the heart of Thebes. The sun's barely up, but already the square outside the court is buzzing like a locust pit. Dust clings to your skin. You're not dressed for this, nobody is, but your linen wrap is the cleanest you own, and that's saying something. Two guards nudge you toward a heavy doorway, carved with protective spells, warnings, and somewhat ominously, a depiction of Anubis weighing a heart. Spoiler alert, yours is not going to pass the test. Inside the courtroom is half sanctuary, half bureaucratic nightmare. Everything is decorated to remind you of cosmic order. Meshat, the goddess of truth and balance, glares at you from every painted wall. Her ostrich feather feels both comforting and deeply unhelpful right now. The ceiling is painted sky blue with stars drifting above like indifferent gods. You're not alone, of course. There are other sorry souls lined up to be judged. A woman accused of watering down temple beer, a merchant who allegedly swapped out real lapis for blue-dyed pebbles, a kid who kicked a priest's goose. You all wait in silence as the judge finally enters robes swirling a gold-handled baton tucked beneath one arm like it's more sacred than sensible. This is a vizier court. That means high stakes. The vizier, the pharaoh's right hand, is technically your judge today, though he may not even speak. He has people for that. One assistant unrolls a scroll of the day's docket. Another wafts incense. A third, alarmingly muscular, just stares at you like he knows you cheated on your grain tax last season. The trial begins. There's no order in the court here. Instead, you bow low, hands outstretched, and recite your named job father's name and the exact day of the lunar calendar. Forget one, and the scribe might quietly erase your existence from court records. Poof. Just like that. What's fascinating is that in Egypt, guilt wasn't always proven it was balanced. Your punishment had to restore harmony, not just satisfy facts. It's why Mayat was so central. You could be found guilty just for tipping the social scales, not necessarily for committing a crime. Still, some evidence did matter. The testimony of 3 respectable citizens could condemn you, unless they were women, or Nubians, or slaves. Then, well, historians still argue whether their testimonies counted equally, depending on the dynasty. You try not to think about it. The scribe reads aloud the charges. You allegedly took 3 handfuls of temple barley, maybe 4. It's unclear. No one measured. But that's enough to trigger the wheels of justice. Or more accurately, the sandals of a priesthood with a lot of free time. You are invited oh so politely to explain yourself. There's no lawyer. You speak. Loud enough to be heard, humble enough not to offend. You're sweating. Everyone's sweating. Even the incense can't cover the smell of fear and sour linen. The vizier says nothing. His silence carries weight. Behind him, a statue of Horus gleams gold paint catching the sunlight. Some believe the god watches the trial through those eyes. Others think it's just creepy decor. Your neighbors testify. One says he saw you lingering near the grain sacks. Another nods dramatically. A third shrugs and mumbles about rats. This is not going well. You desperately want to appeal to the gods. Good news, you can. Bad news, it involves a ritual that includes speaking your innocence before a priest and a feather, and sometimes bloodletting, depending on how convinced the priest is by your tone of voice. You're given the opportunity to take the oath of purity. This involves standing on one leg, holding your hands up, and declaring your innocence while a junior priest sprinkles sacred water over your head. Think baptism, but dustier. You do it wobble a little and manage not to cry. A hush falls over the courtroom. The vizier finally speaks. He doesn't yell. He doesn't even look at you directly. Just reads the punishment aloud like he's announcing lunch specials. You're fined 3 weeks' wages and you're to work off the debt in temple service, specifically helping clean ibis droppings from the reflecting pool. Not the worst outcome, but not a victory lap either. You bow again. This time your knees pop. You're escorted out past columns etched with the deeds of kings. Somewhere a cat coughs. Outside, the sun is merciless, but the people waiting for their trials nod as you pass, as if to say, still breathing, could be worse. You walk past a small statue of Mayat, feather high eyes, calm, smile thin. You nod back. Balance restored, kind of. But don't get too comfortable. The real weirdness is just warming up. The next day, you're back not on trial, but observing. You've decided to learn the ropes. You stick close to an elderly scribe with a twitchy eye and a fondness for explaining things he's definitely making up. See that man, he says, pointing at a hefty individual nervously wringing his hands. He claimed his neighbor's donkey was possessed by a spirit, tried to baptize it in the canal. Got caught. You know what that gets you. You wait expecting a joke. Public donkey apology, the scribe whispers. You blink. He continues. He'll have to kiss the donkey's nose and apologize in front of the whole market and give it extra feed. Then he's banned from donkey ownership for a year. You're speechless, but sure enough, that's exactly what happens. Later, another case unfolds, a baker accused of short-selling bread. The judges ask him to bring a loaf. They poke it, sniff it. One licks it. You're beginning to realize that ancient Egyptian courts were a blend of order theatrics and some serious olfactory courage. Still, everything comes back to Ma'at. Even absurd punishments are meant to preserve balance, not vengeance. You could be whipped, yes, but only a set number of lashes, and usually not to the point of death. Unless, of course, the pharaoh personally signed off. Speaking of pharaohs, they rarely showed up in court, but their decrees were gospel. Once a man argued he was wrongly punished for stealing a royal goose. The judge wrote to the pharaoh, who allegedly responded, if he could catch one, let him keep it. No one's sure if it's true, but the tale still circulates as a reminder. Sometimes justice is just weird. As dusk falls and the last trial ends, you watch court officials record the day's judgments. Papyrus sheets pile high, and a clerk accidentally sneezes on one. No one notices. Probably nothing important. Probably. You head home under a coral pink sky. Your feet ache. Your brain's full of rules, rituals, and donkey apologies. But a strange peace settles over you. In a world where justice involves feathers, feline side eyes, and sacred bread sniffing, maybe just maybe balance isn't about fairness. It's about keeping the chaos at bay. And you've survived day one. You wake up with papyrus fibers still tickling your nose, the faint scent of last night's incense clinging to your skin. The courtroom dust never quite washes off. It lives in your hair, your thoughts, and somewhere between your toes. And today, because apparently your life is now a live-in legal internship, you're back. Only this time, things are smellier. You arrive early just as the temple courtyard begins to stir. A court priest is unpacking ceremonial items beside a squat low altar made of limestone. He nods at you, then gestures toward a collection of baskets filled with onions, garlic strips of linen, and concerningly, something red and gelatinous. The priest smiles. Trial by scent today. You blink. Because yes, apparently that's a thing. You take a step closer. The priest picks up a satchel and offers it to you. It smells like last month's stew met a warm pond and had a deeply unpleasant child. The guilty soul exudes corruption, he explains very seriously, and the gods will know. You look down at the satchel and try not to breathe through your nose. The ritual, he tells you, is based on the belief that guilt pollutes the body. That pollution makes itself known not just spiritually, but aromatically. Essentially, if you stink during this particular ritual, you might be judged guilty. Is this divine wisdom, or just ancient Egypt's version of a middle school locker room inspection? Historians still argue whether these odor-based rituals were symbolic, or if they actually believed bad smells meant divine disapproval. Either way, you're about to watch a man's future hinge on whether or not he sweated too much during questioning. The accused, a fisherman with nervous eyes and a deeply unfortunate beard, steps up to the altar. The priest ties a strip of white linen around his forehead, says a few choice words to Anubis, and offers up a bowl of chopped onions and garlic. The man is told to breathe deeply. Then he stands in silence for a full minute, arms at his sides, while 3 judges sniff him. Yes, literally sniff him. One judge recoils slightly. Another makes a neutral face. The third leans in with the seriousness of someone selecting perfume at a duty-free counter. You are now fully invested. Eventually, the head priest waves a hand. The verdict, guilty. The punishment, 5 days of labor hauling waste from the temple kitchen to the compost fields. His crime selling spoiled fish to a priest's wife. The irony is palpable. So is the smell. The man accepts his fate. You wonder if he regrets that extra pinch of garlic in his breakfast stew. But the olfactory drama doesn't end there. The next case involves a farmer accused of intentionally flooding a neighbor's irrigation channel. There's no witness, no proof, just a vague accusation and a whole lot of suspiciously dry wheat. So, the court turns to a different method, statue swearing. Now, swearing by a god in Egypt isn't as simple as raising your hand and crossing your heart. No, it involves standing in front of a statue usually carved from basalt or wood eyes inlaid with stone and declaring your innocence directly to its face, loudly, with sincerity, and without flinching. You're told that lying to the god statue could summon divine wrath or worse, immediate illness, the kind that makes you collapse mid-sentence, or vomit, or both. You lean in, half expecting something supernatural. The farmer approaches the statue of Thoth, god of wisdom. He looks it straight in the eyes. His voice is shaky but determined. I did not block the water. I did not raise the gate. I did not poison the grain. You hold your breath. Nothing happens. He finishes bows and steps back. The courtroom waits a few seconds, maybe in case he bursts into flames, but nope, he just stands there, awkwardly. Eventually, a clerk nods. The god accepts. Case closed. It's moments like this that make you wonder how much of Egyptian justice was based on fear and how much was theater. One scholar wrote that these rituals worked because people believed they would. If everyone agreed the gods watched, then that was as good as having a surveillance system. Still, it wasn't always so vague. In some cases, you learn guilt was decided using very physical methods. One such ordeal, rarely performed but spoken of with reverence, involved touching a sacred crocodile tooth while repeating an oath. Supposedly, if your pulse raced or you broke into sweat, you were lying. Very scientific. Of course, one person did famously faint mid-oath. He woke up to find himself halfway convicted and halfway legendary. As the day drifts on, you watch more trials, more ritual sniffings, more dramatic gasps. Someone drops a scroll and everyone panics. It contains the day's testimony records. The scribe flaps his arms like a bird as he chases the breeze-blown papyrus. Another case, a woman accused of spreading false omens. Her crime telling neighbors that she saw a hawk fly west at sunrise, a sign of death she claimed. Her neighbors panicked and canceled a grain shipment. This, the court decides, is not a minor thing. Omens in Egypt are like tweets in modern times, fast, viral, and capable of collapsing entire cities. She's made to explain herself before the court. The hawk was real, she insists. The sign was real. The death did not come yet, but it will. The priest frowns. And how do you know this? I felt it in my teeth, she replies, deadpan. The court gives her 3 days in the courtyard's shadows, sweeping bird droppings while reciting hymns to Ma'at. You can't help but admire her poetic flair. You begin to notice patterns. Trials revolve as much around balance as they do evidence. Rituals, though ridiculous at times, keep people honest, or at least humble. People fear lying to statues, fear the sniff test, fear having to stand on one leg for too long while declaring I did not touch the ibis with ill intent. Your scribe friend returns chewing on a reed and looking unusually excited. Tomorrow he whispers someone's doing the sweat trial. You raise an eyebrow. He nods. They place a bowl of cool water on your head while you speak. If it ripples, you're guilty. You laugh. He doesn't. No, really. The ripple means your guilt disturbs even the water. Sure enough, the next morning, a man is led in. He's accused of whispering insults about a temple guard's sandals. Harmless, right? Well, not when the guard is the cousin of a priest. The man is made to stand in the sunlight, a small bowl placed carefully on his bald head. He breathes slowly. A judge begins questioning him. Did you call him Sandfoot? No. Did you say his boots smelled of fish? No. Did you or did you not say he walks like a cow that lost its legs? No. The water in the bowl remains still until a fly lands on the rim and causes the slightest ripple, a collective gasp. The judge leans in. Maynard has spoken. The man is sentenced to recite flattery about temple guards for 7 days straight, in verse, in public. Ancient Egyptian justice, you decide, is 50% cosmic order, 30% performative paranoia, and 20% random vegetables, possibly all 100% effective. As the sun dips low and the last trial ends with someone being fined for inappropriate proximity to sacred laundry, you realize something oddly comforting. No one escapes ridicule. Everyone is subject to the court's strange sense of justice. Rich or poor, if you mess with the balance messes right back. That night, you dream of God statues frowning at you and onions that whisper accusations. You wake up mildly terrified of your own armpits. Justice, after all, doesn't sleep. The next morning, you're roused by the sound of chanting a slow, rhythmic echo bouncing between stone courtyards. At first, you think it's the temple choir rehearsing for one of their more somber hymns about eternal darkness and river reeds. But no, it's much stranger. You squint into the sunrise and spot a line of people parading down the street. They're not dancers, they're not warriors, they're convicts. And they're singing badly. Each one holds a clay tablet above their heads, each etched with their alleged crime. One man's reads, I lied about a cat dying. Another, I miscounted figs on purpose. One just says, obnoxious laughter in temple. This, the scribe informs you, is the procession of the fools. Not an official name, of course, but that's what people call it when minor offenders are marched through town singing songs of apology composed by the priest poets, who apparently moonlight as sarcastic lyricists. You follow the parade mostly out of curiosity, partly because the second man in line is doing a slow shuffle dance that probably wasn't part of the sentencing. The crowd is gentle, some chuckle, others nod solemnly. This isn't humiliation, it's public balance. If your crime was social disruption, your penance must be social restoration. Let people laugh, or feel reassured, or remember not to insult temple cats. The punishments you're learning weren't always harsh. Sometimes they were just peculiar, a little weird, a little theatrical. Take, for example, the man who stole a priest's sandals, used them to go dancing, then tried to return them with palm wine stains. His sentence, not lashes, not prison. He had to carve 12 new pairs of sandals under the supervision of the temple cobbler. Each pair had to be blessed, painted with a scene of moral instruction, and presented to minor officials. His final punishment, becoming the deputy keeper of moral footwear, a made-up position that now exists only because of his mistake. The Egyptians had a flair for turning punishment into job creation. Your scribe friend finds you and offers a handful of dried figs. You look like you've been thinking, he says. You nod. Why don't they just throw people in jail? He chews a fig thoughtfully. We have work camps, but we like people to be useful. Humiliated, sure, but useful. You wonder how many deputy titles came from this sort of logic. The next trial is already underway. A teenage boy stands before the court accused of whispering during a funeral. Normally, that wouldn't be a crime, but he whispered something about the deceased's nose looking like an angry yam, and it was during the embalming rite. The boy denies it. His friends snicker. A statue of Osiris looms behind them. The judge sighs, probably tired of teenage nonsense and levies, a punishment rooted in irony. The boy must serve 7 days as a silent mourner for strangers. He is to stand at funerals in complete silence, holding a painted feather of Maat, embodying reverence. But that's not the end of it. He also has to carve the phrase, "Noses are sacred," onto 30 clay tiles, one for each of the minor gods associated with embalming. You're starting to realize that Egyptian justice isn't just about balance, it's about messages. Every punishment is a PSA wrapped in ritual. Later, you witness a trial involving a merchant who sold fake scarabs to visiting Nubian traders. The charges aren't just fraud, they include damage to diplomatic honor. Heavy stuff. He's found guilty, and his sentence is as complex as his crime. First, he must return the trader's money. Then he's required to craft 20 real scarabs using clay and lapis fragments under supervision, of course. Next, he has to deliver a public apology to the traders, dressed as a scarab. That's right. He's given a beetle-shaped shell made from painted reed and linen. He wears it like a turtle bow's low and recites a prepared statement that includes the line, "May the dung I have pushed be forgotten in the sands of time." You clap. You weren't supposed to, but you do. Even the traders seem amused. Why the costumes, you ask the scribe. He shrugs. Symbolism, theater. The gods like a good laugh too. He might be right. Ancient Egyptian culture was steeped in symbols, metaphors, and stories. Their legal system reflected this. You rarely saw straightforward punishment. Instead, it was layered, sometimes poetic, and always public. You start noticing carvings on temple walls, depictions of past punishments, exaggerated and moralized. One shows a man with his tongue outstretched with Ma'at's feather, balancing delicately on it. Beneath the image, hieroglyphs read, "Speak the truth," or "Speak not at all." Another shows a woman weaving an endless shroud while a cat stares her down, possibly referencing the tale of someone who lied during a will dispute and had to repay her debt by crafting linens for the temple, under feline supervision. You ask around. The scribe tells you of another strange case, one that's still whispered about. A priest who fell asleep during a solstice ritual. His punishment: he had to recite every known hymn to Ra, backwards. It took weeks. He was assigned a minder to keep him awake. The whole ordeal was eventually declared a sacred lesson in wakefulness. Even more odd, they made a song out of it. Back at court, you're shown an ancient punishment log. Each line describes a name, a crime, and an outcome. One stands out. Beck-Nefer, who spilled red ink on temple accounts, is hereby required to clean all accounting reads using his own hair. You read it twice. Apparently, Beck-Nefer's hair was long and thick, and temple scribes thought it would make excellent material for a special cleaning brush. He wore it like a badge of shame. And yes, there's a carving of it on the back of the local grain hall. Historians still argue whether that was real or symbolic. Either way, you now look at your own hair a little nervously. You see, the Egyptians weren't just administering justice, they were curating stories. Punishments became parables, legends that shaped behavior long after the actual people were gone. There was power in that. After all, fear fades, stories last. The scribe leans closer. You want to hear the weirdest one. You nod. There was a woman accused of spitting during a sunrite. The priests were furious, claimed it insulted Ra himself. So her sentence. You lean in. She had to write 100 apologies in sun-dried ink. She had to place each papyrus under Ra's direct light until the message appeared. You pause. What happens if it's cloudy? She had to wait. You both sit in silence for a moment, picturing it. Hundreds of apologies, all slowly emerging under the burning Egyptian sun. Probably the most passive-aggressive punishment in history. You reflect on it, all the parades, the beetle outfits, the sniff tests, the creative rewrites of guilt. Every act, every sentence, every ritual, all designed not just to punish, but to imprint. Justice in ancient Egypt wasn't just about rules, it was about reminders. You leave court that day with a strange peace in your chest. Somehow, all this absurdity makes sense. If justice is a balancing act, maybe it helps to dress the scale in feathers and paint, or scarab shells, or moral footwear. You pass a child tugging at her mother's sleeve, pointing at a court scribe. Will he sing too, she asks. The mother chuckles, only if he forgets his ink. The child giggles and skips away. Balance maintained, harmony restored, order feathered and firmly in place. You wake slowly this time, already warm from the sun peeking through the shutters. Your back aches faintly, probably from yesterday's extended bench sitting, and your mind still echoes with the off-key chants of the convicted choir. But today something's different. Today you're not going to the court. Today, the court is coming to you. Well, not you personally, but the city, the outer streets, the fields. Because justice in ancient Egypt, it turns out, wasn't confined to granite columns and temple steps. It traveled, it walked, it rolled. You hear it before you see it, the squeaking wheels of the judicial bark. Picture a portable courtroom carved and gilded, part chariot, part storage chest, part shrine on wheels. Inside it, a small statue of Ma'at, a handful of sacred texts, and enough scrolls to make any mobile librarian blush. The traveling court Jadi in the local tongue was designed to bring law to the people. Rural farmers, fishermen, field workers, those too far from the big temples to plead their case properly. The state decided, let's bring the law to their doorstep. and you've managed to hop on as an unofficial observer thanks to a few muttered favors and an offering of candied lotus root. The court's headed to a marsh village an hour upriver. The bark floats alongside in a shallow canal pulled by 2 oxen and a very grumpy scribe who mutters the entire way. You're told this village has some very noisy disputes. You're intrigued. Upon arrival, it's clear the locals are excited and nervous. Children peek from rooftops. Elders gather with bundles of linen. One man stands near a stall of baked goods holding a reed basket labeled, "For the court's sweet bribes." You don't know whether to admire or arrest him. The day begins with a property dispute. 2 brothers, Kenu and Harsi, both claim ownership of a single goat. Yes, one goat, brown, slightly cross-eyed. Their father died recently, leaving behind a will, written of course on papyrus, that now looks like it survived a small flood and a minor kitchen fire. Kenu insists the goat was promised to him verbally. Harsi says he fed the goat since birth. The court listens. The judge squints at the papyrus, which has been patched with what looks suspiciously like fish glue. The goat bleats at the wrong moment and briefly interrupts proceedings. Eventually, the judge declares shared custody. On odd days, Kenu gets the goat. On even days, Harsi. On feast days, the goat rests. The audience applauds. You wonder if the goat feels emotionally prepared for this joint arrangement. As the mobile court moves on, the second case proves more complicated. A young woman, Rani, accuses a reed cutter of stealing her marriage necklace and gifting it to another woman. The reed cutter, who has the nervous sweat of a man standing too close to his own lie, denies everything. But then the court unveils a surprise witness goats. No, really. Apparently, Rani's family marked their goats with bits of colored linen, and one of those goats saw the theft, or more accurately, was tethered near the basket where the necklace was stored, and its odd behavior the next morning led Rani to suspect something was wrong. The judges don't laugh, they nod. In Egypt, animals are witnesses more often than you'd expect. Cats, birds, donkeys. Not because they testify, obviously, but because their behavior is considered spiritually revealing. A nervous ibis, bad omen. A happy goat, probable truth. So the court takes this seriously. Eventually, a friend of the accused confesses the necklace was taken as a joke pass to a lover, then buried under a pile of flax. It is retrieved dusty but intact. The court returns it to Rani, who bows low. The reed cutter's punishment: public apology, 1 week of wood-carving labor for Rani's family, and the requirement to craft 3 necklaces from reeds, each shaped like the Eye of Horus. You are beginning to suspect that everyone in ancient Egypt had to learn some form of arts and crafts just to survive the legal system. By midday, the court has judged a man who cut irrigation canals without permission. He must repair every channel by hand. A baker who sold underweight loaves, now sentenced to donate double rations for 10 days. And a woman who spread false dreams in the market square. Her penance: interpret actual dreams for a week, under priestly supervision, while fasting. The law here is less about retribution, more about balance, literally. In fact, a favorite courtroom metaphor is the scales of Mayat depicted on temple walls as a set of golden balances, one side holding the heart of the accused, the other a feather. Light heart innocent, heavy heart guilty. The real court doesn't weigh anyone's heart, not physically, but the phrase is often invoked. Let your heart be light, one judge tells a crying child who's broken a communal pot. The child nods, hiccups, and accepts the punishment. Sweep the entire street, then write 5 times on papyrus, "I will not kick pots when I'm bored." You begin to see the ritualistic power of the legal language here. It isn't just what you did, it's what your actions said about you, and what you must now say about yourself to return to balance. That afternoon, the court addresses a case involving a man accused of uttering cursed words at the river. The phrasing alone is chilling. Apparently, during a particularly frustrating fishing trip, the man shouted insults at the Nile itself. Witnesses say he cursed its currents, its fish, its general attitude. He even allegedly called it a muddy ribbon of disappointment. This cannot stand. The river is sacred. Cursing it isn't just bad form, it's bad fortune for the whole village. His punishment: he must perform 3 river-honoring rituals, 1 in the morning, 1 at noon, 1 at dusk. Each involves wading in, reciting blessings, releasing flower petals, and apologizing to the water while other villagers watch. You stand with the crowd that evening as he offers an apology to the Nile, his voice wavering. "Great river," he says, "you are not a ribbon of disappointment. You are a glorious wave-bearing lifeblood." Your mud is inspirational. Someone giggles. He continues. Your currents are wise. Your fish are clever. I am sorry for every word, except the one about the leeches. He bows. The court approves. Justice again is restored with ceremony and a pinch of poetry. You marvel at how consistent the pattern is. A wrong action leads to a symbolic correction. The legal system doesn't seek punishment for its own sake. It wants participation in restoration. And public rituals make sure that justice is seen, not just done. One old man who's seen 3 traveling courts in his time puts it like this. The court visits like a storm, loud, necessary, and everything smells better after. That night, the court camps outside the village. You're given a mat near the edge of the bark. Crickets sing. The scribe offers you a tale before sleep. Once he says, a man who lied about the weight of his grain was sentenced to sleep under his grain sack for 10 nights. It was meant to teach him honesty through physical memory. And did it work, you ask? Oh yes, he straightened his spine and his soul. You fall asleep picturing a man flattened under a sack of wheat, mumbling apologies to Maat between snores. The next morning, the court packs up. The bark creaks. The oxen moo. And the whole strange caravan heads to the next village where surely someone has insulted a papyrus scroll or tried to bribe a crocodile with honey cakes. Because justice never rests. Not when the roads are dusty, the hearts are heavy, and the goat is shared on alternating days. You stretch awake on your papyrus mat, vaguely aware that your dreams involved a goat giving courtroom testimony and a necklace whispering legal advice. Probably not a coincidence. The sounds of packing drift in snapping ropes, oxen snorting, a priest shouting about misplaced scrolls of moral significance. The traveling court is on the move again. But this time, you're not following it. You've been granted special access to something stranger, quieter, and a little more unsettling. You're going inside the punishment archives. Buried deep in a stone chamber beneath the main temple complex, these records are not open to the public. They are dusty, meticulous, and weird. The lead archivist greets you with a barely visible nod and motions you toward a low table covered in papyrus scrolls and palm fiber string. This, she whispers, is where Peculiar goes to be remembered. She's not wrong. The archive holds centuries of ancient Egyptian court records, not just names and verdicts, but detailed accounts of bizarre punishments, ritual atonements, magical interventions, and yes, even supernatural appeals. The first scroll she hands you is delicate smelling of musk and crushed lotus. You unroll it slowly. It tells the story of Patahor, a temple worker who broke a sacred mirror. Now, in most cultures, this would warrant a warning and a firm broom. Not in ancient Egypt. The mirror wasn't just any mirror. It had been blessed by a priestess of Hathor. It was considered a reflective portal, a surface where gods might glance back. So naturally, the court didn't take kindly to this offense. Patahor's punishment. For 30 days, he had to walk barefoot through the temple each morning, holding a shard of the broken mirror and whispering, I see myself, I mend myself. On the final day, he had to bury the shards under a sycamore tree symbol of renewal while reciting verses backward. The record ends with a note, no further misfortune followed. You blink. Did it work? The archivist shrugs. We still use that tree. Next, she hands you a case that makes your brow furrow. Nefru, daughter of Paket, was found guilty of slander. She'd accused her neighbor of using cursed oil to make her husband lose interest in her, publicly, at market, while throwing pickled onions. The court, unsurprisingly, was not amused. Her punishment, 1 week of silence, during which she wore a linen band over her mouth that said in painted hieroglyphs, words have weight. Mine were heavy. She also had to offer daily oil at the temple altar, not to uncurse herself, but as a public act of purification. You stare at the scroll's tiny notations. One reads, neighbor's husband remained uninterested, likely unrelated. Sometimes the court had a sense of humor. The archivist sees your smirk. Want a weirder one? She unrolls another scroll, this one sealed with wax shaped like a frog. You raise an eyebrow. Oh, that means it involved amphibians. You weren't ready. The scroll tells the tale of Menka, a fisherman who kept faking frog sightings near sacred wells to scare people away and fish undisturbed. This wasn't just rude, it was sacrilegious. The frog was sacred to Heset, goddess of fertility and birth, so frightening people with fake frog invasions, kind of a big no-no. His sentence: he had to collect and care for 20 real frogs, feeding them, cleaning their clay basins, and ensuring their comfort, whatever that meant. Each frog was named after a virtue: truth, balance, respect, patience. You ask, did he name them or did the court? The archivist taps her scroll. The court. Menka tried naming one Jumpy here, and the priest corrected him with wisdom. You grin. As the day wears on, you dig deeper into the archive's stranger cases. Some are almost theatrical in their symbolism. One man, Nebtawi, accidentally spilled red dye into a temple basin during festival prep. The punishment. He was assigned to restore color balance across the temple. Every mural had to be touched up, every faded statue repainted. His final act, repainting the scales of Mayat on the western wall feather, included. It took him 40 days. One entry simply reads, "Never dropped a pot of anything again." You notice how often symbolism plays into these punishments. The more peculiar the crime, the more poetic the penance. Another case catches your eye. This one is less dramatic, but more mysterious. A man named Kai had been accused of laziness. That's right, laziness, specifically for taking frequent naps during irrigation season and letting water escape. The court couldn't whip someone for being sleepy, so they invented something far more existential. Kai was sentenced to carry a small clay pot filled with Nile water for 10 days. Always. Everywhere. He had to sleep next to it, eat with it nearby, bathe with it watching. If any water spilled, the days restarted. The sentence was called burden of flow. The court reasoned that if he could not respect water's movement, he would learn its weight. You pause. That one hits a little differently. Still, not all punishments were so poetic. Some were just straight up odd. One scroll tells of a woman who hid a neighbor's sandals during festival day, a prank she claimed, but the court disagreed. Her sentence? She had to construct 5 decoy sandals, each filled with a different surprise: flower pebbles, petals, perfume, and your personal favorite, a tiny clay mouse. They were presented as gifts of mystery during the next festival. She had to stand nearby deadpan while people opened them. One noblewoman got the perfume sandal and reportedly clapped. Another found the pebble one and called it symbolic of hardship. You wonder if sarcasm was invented in ancient Egypt or simply discovered. Just before sunset, the archivist lights a small oil lamp and offers you her favorite scroll. "This one's almost forgotten," she says. You unroll it carefully. A priest accused of arrogance, specifically of boasting that he had memorized every word the gods had ever spoken. The court called it divine exaggeration, so they punished him with divine confusion. They instructed the priest to write daily scrolls of wisdom, but he wasn't allowed to read them after writing. At the end of each week, they burned them without being opened. He did this for a month. The lesson knowledge kept isn't always knowledge shared, and divine memory isn't for human boasting. You sit in silence for a long time. These weren't just punishments. They were plays, rituals, mirror-holding acts meant to teach, tease, and occasionally terrify. Some scholars argue whether these stories are fully true or just moralistic records passed down to keep future scribes in line. The archivist herself admits some cases blur the line between history and theater. But here's the thing, you're starting not to care, because the lesson always lands. You ask the archivist one last question. Were people scared of these punishments? She tilts her head, sometimes, but mostly they were scared of being ridiculous. Ancient Egyptians feared being foolish in the eyes of the gods. As you leave, she hands you a small replica of a punishment amulet, a tiny painted frog inscribed with the word balance. You pocket it quietly. Outside, the sun sets over the city, and the court bark is returning. The same oxen, the same sacred boxes, and probably inside someone arguing over a shared chicken or a stolen onion. Because justice in ancient Egypt wasn't distant, it was intimate. It walked beside you. It knew your flaws, and sometimes it made you carry frogs. You shuffle awake before dawn, this time feet tucked beneath a woven reed blanket, dreams still heavy with frogs and feather-weighted hearts. The traveling court's returning bark creaks into view, down the canal glinting in the bluish early light. This time, though, you're not just an observer. You've been invited, which in this context means voluntold, to join as an honorary assistant in the lower court, a kind of glorified scribe's scribe. Your job: sit quietly, listen harder, and absolutely do not spill ink on the official seals. Again, the city's district court is already buzzing, and today's docket repeat offenders. Yes, even in ancient Egypt, some people just couldn't help themselves, and the state, well, it had thoughts on that. Your first case involves a familiar face. Hetepi, a grain merchant with a well-documented habit of mixing sand into his barley bags, convicted not once but 3 times. The court has tried fines, warnings, grain-weighing duties, even a brief stint making educational papyri titled "Why Sand is Not a Spice." Nothing stuck. So today, the punishment is new. He must spend 10 market days seated next to a giant, perfectly sculpted fake bag of barley made of limestone engraved with the phrase, "My dishonesty was heavier than the truth." Each customer walks past it. Every child points. One merchant even sets up a tiny puppet stage next to it, performing dramatic reenactments of honest barley versus the sand thief. You glance at Hetepi's expression. Flat, tired, just a man with a very public, very heavy metaphor next to his knees. Repeat offender punishments were all about theater, the kind designed to burn into your memory like a sun-marked ostracon. Ancient Egyptians weren't interested in mindless torture. They wanted social memory ritual consequence and some clever wordplay. Case 2, Tia, daughter of Userhet, a fabric dyer with an unstoppable compulsion to borrow purple dye meant for temple linens. This was no small offense. Purple dye was sacred, hard to produce, symbolically powerful, and she kept using it to color headscarves for her cats. Her punishment: she must collect fabric scraps, stitch them into one large quilt, and dye it with the most hideous shade available, an infamous muddy green concoction associated with funerary bundles and festival leftovers. Then display it publicly titled "I dishonored the dye." But here's where it gets weirder. A priest takes interest in the quilt. He declares it oddly beautiful. Tia's punishment becomes popular. By day 3, market-goers are requesting funerary dye shawls. Historians still argue whether this incident sparked the ugly dye craze of that era's fashion trend. Punishment, it seems, could boomerang into celebrity. Next up, Khonsu accused of dream fraud. That's right, dream fraud. He claimed to interpret others' dreams for coin using divine-sounding nonsense he made up on the spot. Your fish dream means wealth. The falling fig tree. Obvious promotion. Eventually, his lies unraveled when a client sacrificed a goat based on his advice and received 0 blessings in return. Now the court must deal with someone who lied in the name of prophecy, so they get clever. Khonsu must stand backwards in the dream interpretation square for 1 week, offering silent apologies to passers-by. Around his neck hangs a tablet reading, "I mistook nonsense for guidance." On festival night, he is required to listen to everyone else's dreams without responding, then repeat them aloud exactly as spoken. It's exhausting, embarrassing, but perhaps, just perhaps, enlightening. The 4th case hits different. Sitra, a scribe, was caught falsifying burial documents. Specifically, she claimed someone had paid for golden amulets when they'd actually gone with humble shell charms. The court was furious. This wasn't just fraud. This was a spiritual shortchange. The dead relied on their burial goods to navigate the underworld. If they entered the afterlife missing a paid-for scarab, that was a cosmic betrayal. Sitra's punishment: she is ordered to write 42 copies of the negative confession, one for each judge of the afterlife, in perfect calligraphy, on scrolls dipped in temple ash. Every line ends with the phrase, "And I did not lie about the sacred." She writes in silence day after day. Hands cramp, ink runs dry, but she finishes. And then, on the final day, she offers her own necklace, a modest lapis lazuli bead, as an atonement to the family she wronged. They accept it. It's one of the rare punishments that ends with public forgiveness, spoken aloud with the court as witness. It's a little moving. As the day winds forward, you begin to notice something important. Repeat offenders in ancient Egypt weren't just punished again. They were punished differently. The logic: if the same penalty didn't work the first time, maybe you hadn't touched the heart yet. So the court got creative. A thief who stole temple fruit once was whipped. The second time, he had to plant 50 fruit trees and sing to them loudly every morning. Neighbors complained about the singing, but the trees thrived. One scroll, brought to you by a bemused assistant judge, details a potter who routinely underfired his wares to save fuel. They cracked. Customers complained. Once, a warning. Twice, a fine. Third time, the court orders him to create 100 miniature pots. Perfectly fired, then shatter them all in public. "Feel the loss you created," the judge had said. The man cried, then opened a new stall. His pots excellent. You ask the assistant judge if this all gets exhausting. The endless creativity, the metaphor stacking. He smirks. It's better than execution and more memorable than a scroll. But not every punishment works. Take the case of Senahotep, a lazy labor overseer who repeatedly failed to report injuries on the construction site. His sentence, injury empathy. He had to wrap his own leg in a cast and hobble to work for a week, carry stones, take orders. He faked a limp so well he kept it after the punishment ended. Historians still debate if he ever walked normally again, or if he decided limping earned more sympathy. Then there's Beckett, a woman with a knack for gossip. She didn't just talk, she narrated, colorfully, with voices. The court told her, narrate something useful. So for 10 days, she had to stand in the temple courtyard and recite legal scrolls aloud to anyone passing by. She used accents, sang some parts, turned one into a duet with a confused guard. People loved it. Now they hire her during festivals. You glance at your notes and laugh under your breath. Egypt's legal system really believed in social reprogramming through ritualized performance. Punishment wasn't the end. It was a new role. As the afternoon wears on, the courtroom fills with tension. Final case, Amos, a brickmaker. He repeatedly cut corners, literally making molds shallower to speed up drying. Buildings wobbled. One temple hall cracked. This time, the court goes all in. His sentence? He must build a tiny model hall in miniature, complete with working columns, mud brick layers, and a model of Maat standing at the center. Every detail must be perfect. It takes him 6 weeks. Tourists begin to visit. When he finishes, the court leaves the model intact as a cautionary tale. A sign hangs beside it. Justice properly supported does not crack. Poetic and effective. As you help organize scrolls that evening, the presiding judge turns to you and murmurs, they remember the odd ones, not the pain, not the fine, but the frog names, the sandals, the lime quilt dye. You nod, because of course they do. The repetition in punishment isn't just about escalating consequences. It's about reminding people they live in a world where balance matters and where failure, no matter how many times, still opens a path to ritual repair. A world where even if your hands mix sand with grain again, someone is waiting with a limestone lesson and a clever rhyme. You leave court that night, tired, amused, and a little unnerved by how much of yourself you saw in those scrolls. After all, don't we all walk around with heavy hearts and missed chances? Maybe, just maybe, what we need is a frog named Patience and a pot we have to break on purpose. By now, you've seen enough peculiar punishments to last several dynasties, and yet here you are again, back in that dusty courtyard where even the wind seems to whistle in hieroglyphs. You blink up at the white sky, wondering if the sun has any idea how many times it has watched the same arguments play out in this courtroom. Today's lesson, punishments that moved literally. This isn't metaphor anymore. This is exile, forced travel, and the ancient Egyptian version of being sent away to think about what you did. Spoiler, it often involved sand and long, hot walks. The morning's first scroll crackles as it opens. A name appears, Penri, son of Nebamun, charged with falsifying irrigation records, costing the province a dry harvest. Crops withered, fish vanished, and the local goddess statue was found with cracked lips from thirst, which is not ideal PR, you note. So, what do they do to Penri? They send him away. Not just anywhere. No, the court assigns him to the edge of the Fayum oasis. His job count and catalog every canal ditch and read throttled bend by foot. Then carve a clay tablet diagram of each one complete with measurements. It's exile by cartography. He isn't imprisoned, but he's not home either. Locals treat him like a strange walking warning. Children call him Map Man. At night, he sleeps beside the water he once misjudged. There's irony in every blister. Exile in Egypt was rarely dramatic banishment across borders. It was more often relocalization, a state-sanctioned forced walkabout. You didn't disappear, you were repositioned, and not for your comfort. Next up, Henutawi, a singer from the Temple of Hathor, accused of mocking hymns during a lunar festival, not just mocking, parodying with animal noises. Her voice was unfortunately very good. So the court, with straight faces and musical vengeance, assigns her to a border shrine near Nubia. Her punishment, lead sunrise chant solo for 120 days. The shrine's tiny, no audience, just sand, wind, and the occasional curious hyena. Henutawi goes from star soloist to desert soundcheck. But something odd happens. By week 4, passing traders begin to stop and listen. They donate bread. They request songs. She composes new hymns. Locals call her Desert Voice. Punishment maybe, but it became a relocation of resonance. Her song still echoes in those cliffs if you believe the locals, or the wind. Now we turn the scroll sideways literally. Baketmut, a boatwright, is charged with painting gods in incorrect positions on ceremonial vessels. He claimed it was an artistic interpretation. The priests disagreed. So what do? They assign him to the opposite boat. A specially crafted bark floats backwards on the Nile. Front is rear. Oars face the wrong way. Even the figurehead points behind. And Baketmut must steer it upstream. It's a journey with no spiritual symmetry. Villagers shout "wrong way boat" as it glides past. And the river, of course, resists. It's a watery exile, a rolling symbol of misaligned order. The court doesn't say when he's allowed to stop, just that he'll know when he's rowed right. That phrase ends up carved above his berth. Years later, children in nearby towns start building wrong way toys reenacting his awkward voyage. His punishment becomes a folktale. Exile in Egyptian justice wasn't about forgetting the accused. It was about placing them in a setting that mirrored their misdeed. If you misused water, you got the desert. Misaligned sacred images, you faced the river's mockery. If you disrespected a god of the harvest, you might be sent to count crows in a fallow field literally. Jehudi Hotep, a priest's assistant, once got caught stealing dried figs meant for an offering. His exile: assigned fig picker on an abandoned estate alone with a stone fig tree. He had to gather symbolic fruit each morning and chant "I return what I took" while placing pebbles in a basket. A passing tax official reported hearing him cry. Another court tale features Senbi, a mid-level architect who faked building reports to hide delays. The punishment: exiled to a site with no structure, just foundations, and told to finish what he claimed was finished. For 6 months, he wandered columns that didn't exist, marked air with chalk, delivered reports on progress he was finally for real making. You wonder, did that teach him the value of honest delays, or just improve his lying? Historians still argue whether Senbi built anything after that. Even exile came with quirks. In one rare case, Jufi, a gambler who repeatedly disrupted temple processions by shouting dice predictions, was exiled not to the desert, but to the quietest corner of the Valley of the Kings. He was tasked with watching tomb workers, silently. No dice, no shouting, just echoes and dust. The workers hated it. Jufi oddly thrived. He became a stillness expert, reportedly developed a whisper-based counting system that became trendy among apprentice scribes. Sometimes punishment and personality collided in weird harmony, but not always. One story less funny tells of Mut Nofret, a merchant's widow accused of helping fugitives by falsifying river travel documents. That was serious. Her punishment: a forced pilgrimage, not sacred, but symbolic. She had to walk the ancient route of truth, a road between two shrines to Maat, one near Thebes and one deep in the desert. It was long, brutal, and walked barefoot slowly over 2 weeks. She was escorted by silence, not guards, just witnesses. Each day she recited her crime aloud at a set distance, a formal chant, a procession of regret. There was no public mockery, no gag scrolls, just this quiet, relentless march across sand. It was exile, yes, but it was also a ritual, a kind of living confession written in footsteps. The court records note her return. No further offenses. Then there's the peculiar tale of Pam Netcher, a judge himself. Yes, judges weren't immune caught taking bribes from both sides of a boundary dispute. His exile was ceremonial. He had to officiate fake trials on a literal borderline, a stone mark halfway between two regions, using broken pots as evidence and children as actors. He was never allowed to enter either region again. He became known as the judge between. Once a real dispute arose nearby and locals requested his verdict. It was wise, balanced, honest. The court didn't reinstate him, but his punishment became a quiet office. If you wanted a neutral opinion, you went to the judge between. Exile in Egypt wasn't exile like we think of it. Cold banishment, locked gates, lost names. It was often about symbolic dislocation, putting people in places that mirrored their mistake, or in some cases challenged it. The logic must be restored, not erased. And if you could live out your imbalance, maybe you'd learn something. Maybe others would too. Some scrolls speak of the trial walks, a now lost ritual where someone sentenced to wander between 5 temples, one for each cardinal direction, plus the center, making small offerings and publicly stating what they'd do differently next time. It was part punishment, part performance, part very slow road trip. Others mention the reeds of thinking an exile camp along the delta, full of minor offenders sent to do nothing but copy proverbs and organize reeds. Their output, the neatest basketry ever recorded. It became a boutique export. Even in banishment, people found a rhythm, and the state had got balance and baskets. You shift on your bench, gazing out at the late-day shimmer of heat. Somewhere out there, someone is still on their exile walk, stepping over dunes, whispering lines about honesty, and maybe, just maybe, learning why it matters. Or at least getting really good at fig metaphors. Either way, punishment in motion was a uniquely Egyptian solution to wrongdoing, not just to remove, but to realign, to build a journey into the consequence until movement became memory. And exile. Exile became a story you told your children, a lesson you didn't forget, not when the sun followed you the whole way. So you've walked with the exiled, heard their dusty sandals crunch over the Nile's forgotten trails, and probably imagined how hot your own feet would be doing the same. And just when you think maybe, just maybe, the ancient Egyptian justice system is cooling down, it throws you a curveball, swaddled in gold linen and humming incense punishment by ritual. That's right. You've now wandered into the sacred side of sentencing, where divine disapproval is just as binding as a court decree, and wrongdoers aren't just facing judges, they're facing gods, or at least their earthly representatives in elaborate wigs. Today's courtroom is unlike the others. You walk through pillars carved with lotus blossoms and falcons, each watching you with stone stillness. A high ceiling opens above, exposing the sky not for airflow, but for the witness of Ra. That's your jury, the sun itself. You sit on a reed mat. It itches naturally. Across from you is Pa-di-Hor, a priest of modest rank accused of preparing ritual oils with the wrong blend twice. The temple's falcon statue apparently reeked like spoiled melon. Now, a chemical mishap might not sound too terrible to you, but in ancient Egypt, fragrance wasn't just perfume, it was identity. The gods had smells, offending them by mixing cinnamon instead of cedar. That's practically divine slander. The court's response, a ritual unbinding. Pa-di-Hor is ritually disrobed, don't worry. PG-13 here, and led to a courtyard where 7 jars each containing a different sacred oil are laid before him. He must smell each one, name its components, and describe which god it honors. If he misidentifies even one a week of ritual silence, fasting, and solitary oil blending until he remembers the god's true sense, you bet he gets it wrong on jar 4. That's punishment by ritual, equal parts test lesson and humiliation, though always wrapped in gold-threaded solemnity. Take Tai, a temple dancer accused of inserting unsanctioned flourishes into the dance of Dendera during a major festival. Think interpretive belly dance. During a funeral. The court doesn't whip or fine her. No, she's sentenced to mirror dance. Each morning at sunrise for 1 lunar cycle, she must perform the traditional dance facing a polished bronze mirror while a high priestess watches. Any mistakes start again. The kicker, she must chant the correct movements aloud. It's choreography meets oral exam under divine spotlight. By week 2, her voice is hoarse, but her movements flow like ink on wet papyrus. Her punishment becomes practice, and ironically, she ends up teaching the next generation of dancers. Historians still debate whether this was intentional rehabilitation or just a priestly flex. Now let's lean towards something even stranger. Rami, a grain measure accused of short-counting offerings to the goddess Renenutet, is sentenced to what's called the Scales of Reproof. It involves an actual scale. One side holds ritual grain, the other his own words. He must recite all 42 negative confessions, those I have not, lines from the Book of the Dead, while standing barefoot on the scale. If his weight tips the balance improperly at any point, the confession is stopped, and he must spend the day fasting and copying agricultural hymns. His peers called it talking yourself into starvation. But by the end of his sentence, the scales balance. His confessions match his weight. It's poetic, if odd, and probably stressful during allergy season. Then there's Khonsu Imwasit, a water carrier for a temple who was caught skipping purification rites and just dumping Nile water into the basins. That's a no-no. His punishment ritual drowning. Calm down is symbolic, mostly. He must submerge himself fully clothed into the temple's sacred lake every morning at dawn, reciting verses of purity as he goes under. then remain still underwater, or as long as lungs allow emerging only when he feels cleansed. By week 3, he's a soggy philosopher. The priests nickname him Lotus Lung. He eventually develops a kind of cult following among novice priests. They turn his dunkings into morning rituals. He even inspires a minor poem. He who sank with sin rose with breath of might. See, ritual punishment wasn't just about suffering, it could rebrand you. But sometimes it got super weird. Take Sherida Scribe, who altered a royal genealogy scroll to make her cousin look more important. A total favor job. Her sentence, ritual erasure. She's not executed. She's not exiled. Instead, she's forced to oversee the removal of her own name from public inscriptions lists and temple rosters. But here's the twist. She must say her name aloud before each deletion, every single time. It's a punishment of vanishing with full consciousness. Imagine her standing in front of a wall reading Sherrit, daughter of, and then carving it out herself, over and over, a slow undoing. Some say she later became a kind of ascetic. Others claim her name was quietly re-added by sympathetic apprentices, but the official record sandblasted. Punishment as ritual deletion, still awake good. Because Nebu, a novice metalworker, was punished with ritual reflection literally, he was accused of crafting idols with flawed proportions. One god's arms were too long, another had 2 left feet. To correct him, the court sets up a long corridor of polished copper shields. Each day, Nebu walks it carrying his flawed statue, reciting an apology with every step. The idea, see himself and the error reflected 100 times. He becomes a metaphor in motion. The phrase shield walk even enters the temple lexicon used by sculptors as a joke and a warning. But ritual punishments weren't just solo journeys. Sometimes they were communal. Like in the case of Merida Baker, who used inferior grain in sacred bread. Her punishment, the ritual loaf line. She must bake shape and offer loaves to everyone in her district temple, including children, each loaf marked with her apology burned into the crust. The people start to refer to the bread as "I'm sorry loaf." It becomes a hit. So successful, in fact, that a priest orders the recipe copied and added to festival cuisine. Her crime becomes cuisine, and the ritual a recipe. Of course, not all ritual punishments ended in fame. Some were quieter, stranger, more haunting. A mysterious figure known only as the listener appears in one scroll. A temple guard caught eavesdropping on sacred chants. His sentence: 7 days in the Chamber of Echoes, an underground room with curved stone walls that return whispers 5-fold. He must remain there alone and chant psalms to Ma'at, but everything he says is bounced back to him louder, slower, disjointed. The goal: make him hear himself too well. Did it work? No one knows. The chamber still exists, and if you whisper in just the right spot, they say you can hear his last chant. Let silence guide the tongue. Goosebumps yet, you've earned them. Because punishment by ritual was a sacred theater. Less whips, more whispers, less jails, more journeys. It wasn't about destroying you, it was about reshaping you in public spiritual ways. And that reshaping, it left footprints deeper than exile ever could. Even today, remnants of these sentences linger in Egyptian folklore. Grandmothers scolding kids with "don't get loaf-lined," scribes joking that their typos will send them to the shield hall, priests reminding novices to smell every jar twice. These weren't just sentences. They became stories. And stories in ancient Egypt were the most binding kind of justice, because long after your breath was gone, your tale remained carved in stone, painted on tombs, or murmured between temple pillars. You glance up at a small alcove in this courtroom. A statue of Mayat stands there, feather poised, gaze steady. She doesn't need to shout. Her kind of punishment, it hums. Quiet, deep, lasting, and somehow still echoing. You're back on your feet. Or rather, you're still on your woven mat listening to that last echo of ritual justice fade into the temple walls. But before you can even brush the imaginary papyrus dust from your shoulders, you're pulled into something far more chilling and far more personal. Tonight, you're walking into the chambers of public humiliation. Now don't roll your eyes. This isn't just ancient walk of shame territory. No ancient Egyptians made humiliation an art form. Their justice system believed that embarrassment could soften the hardest hearts and maybe, just maybe, teach a lesson that a whip never could. So you follow the sound of sandals dragging slowly, Ahead, a young man in his 20s, Hedapu, walks through the center of a busy village square, wearing nothing but a tunic made of reed paper. Yes, paper, crinkly, scratchy, and wildly transparent in the sun. His crime, claiming to be a priest of Thoth without completing the proper rites. His punishment, mockery by costume. Kids point. Vendors chuckle behind their stalls. A goat bleats disapprovingly. Hedapu's cheeks burn hotter than the upper Egyptian sun. But here's the twist on his back, written in red ochre, is the phrase, "I lied to the ibis." Now maybe that seems mild, even silly, but in Egypt, lying to a god wasn't just a sin. It was social suicide, and doing it in a tight-knit town, forget sleeping in peace. The whispers would linger longer than the Nile flood. Mainstream historians confirm the use of public ridicule in judicial records from the New Kingdom onward. In some cases, offenders were paraded around holding signs or wearing satirical masks that told the crowd what they'd done. Take Seba, a tax clerk who skimmed grain from temple stores. His punishment involved standing on a plinth in front of the storehouse with a rope of empty sacks tied around his neck. Attached was a tag that read, "My stomach is full of theft." For 2 full market days, he stood like a tragic statue of incompetence. Mothers pointed him out to their children like a walking fable. And the pigeons. Let's just say they weren't gentle critics. But even more layered were the humble walks. These were processions designed to reduce your ego to ancient rubble. You'd walk a measured path, typically between 2 sacred landmarks, while chanting a confession written by the high priest. And just for fun, you'd be followed by temple novices ringing little bronze bells every time you stumbled. Tian, a noble woman caught spreading gossip about a high priestess's questionable hairline, was sentenced to 3 days of humble walks between the temple of Isis and the eastern wellspring. Her chant, "A mouth unclean soils the land." She walked barefoot, head-shaved robes dyed plain brown. Onlookers didn't laugh, they whispered, because even though it was a punishment, it carried a sacred weight. Her disgrace was communal. You could almost hear the gods leaning in. Now, of course, not all humiliation was so poetic. Some punishments were just weird, like the Jarhead trial. Mena, a shipwright, had falsely accused his rival of sabotage. Once his lie was revealed, the court sentenced him to wear a painted amphora over his head for 1 full day, with slits for the eyes and a hole for breathing. On the jar, a crude face with its tongue sticking out and the words, "I bark but carry no truth." He was led around the harbor by 2 guards while sailors hooted and slapped his back. Local artists turned the image into a popular tavern mural. He never recovered his reputation. Historians still argue whether Jarhead trials were official court sentences or just folk justice endorsed by community leaders. Either way, the image stuck. There are shards in museums with similar graffiti-fanged faces, wagging tongues and slurs like one who speaks from his elbows. Egyptians had a way with shade. You shift now, finding yourself outside a weaving hall where a middle-aged woman named Katie is undergoing her sentence. Her crime selling shoddy linen to priests and calling it blessed weave. The court's response, weave walk. She's forced to wear a patched robe made from her own rejected cloth with each square marked by the words unworthy threads. Then she must walk past the Weavers' Guild, nodding at each loom, while younger women inspect her robe, tisking loudly. She doesn't cry. She straightens her spine, but the redness in her eyes tells you this punishment stings deeper than any lash ever could. By the time she reaches the last loom, she stops and whispers, "May your thread be stronger than mine." The guild leader, stone-faced until then, nods once. It's a silent absolution. And that's the thing with these punishments, they were spectacles, but not always cruel. Some were deeply symbolic. Like Pesht, a student scribe caught plagiarizing funeral prayers, basically ancient copy-paste. His punishment, stand at the tomb of the person he copied from and read the prayer out loud, corrected while the family watched. He must then offer incense and apologize directly to the deceased, not just the family, the actual spirit. The scroll he copied from is then burned, and he must transcribe the corrected version by hand 3 times, with no break for lunch. Now that's a group project gone wrong. Even architecture played a role in humiliation. One court in Thebes had a designated chamber of echoes, not the spooky one from before, but a small stone chamber where sound bounced unnaturally. Offenders were brought inside and made to recite their offenses aloud. The sound repeated back at them again and again in distorted echoes, like divine mockery. Huya perfumey vendor who swapped frankincense for cheap myrrh lasted only 2 minutes before covering his ears and confessing everything, including crimes the court hadn't even accused him of. His punishment: be forced to carry a censored label on his vials honest since yesterday. Did it work? His business recovered, but customers always chuckled reading the label. Sometimes shame sticks in the best way. And then there was the sarcophagus sit, reserved for blasphemers and chronic temple pranksters. Becca Tomb Cleaner, who defaced a priest's name as a joke, was sentenced to sit in an open sarcophagus from sundown to sunrise, unarmed, unsheltered, and surrounded by real funerary amulets. The symbolism: you want to treat the dead like a joke, now you sit among them. At midnight, a priest walks by whispering, still laughing. No reply, just the sound of crickets, and a man rethinking his career. But the most infamous humiliation punishment: name cropping. This was for those who brought shame to the temple without committing full-blown heresy. Rather than full name erasure like our friend Sherritt, their names were symbolically cropped. Ippy, a former water bearer, gets caught stealing small offerings from altars. He's stripped of the second half of his name in temple records, forever listed as Ip. No one calls him that with respect. Even his children refer to him as Ip the Half. It's petty, it's public, and it lasts. But not all stories end in disgrace. Some turn the punishment into poetry. Like Neferu, accused of spreading false prophecies. Her sentence: 1 hour a day in the town square, reciting truthful proverbs aloud. She begins with bitterness, but soon her words resonate. Crowds gather, scribes take notes. The people start calling her Neferu the True. Her crime is forgotten, her voice remains. You see, in Egypt, humiliation wasn't the point. Transformation was. The rituals, the chants, the parades in ridiculous garb, all were meant to scrape away ego and leave space for Ma'at. Balance, truth, self-awareness with a side of papyrus shame, and, perhaps most fascinating, some people volunteered for it. Yes, voluntary humiliation, as penance, as protest, or as purification before a major temple service. There's a scroll describing a woman named Senebtisi who once accused her brother of theft during a sibling spat. Turns out he was innocent. Guilt ate at her so badly that she wore ashes on her face for 10 days and distributed "I wrongly spoke" papyrus slips around her town. A temple priest sees this, writes about it, and later uses her story as an example of what true penance looks like. So, tonight, as you settle deeper into the rhythm of this odd ancient world, remember, public embarrassment wasn't about destruction. It was about redemption with an audience. About walking shamefully, so others didn't have to. Maybe you've felt that kind of walk once or twice. Hopefully minus the reed paper tunic. But if the ancient Egyptians taught us anything, it's this. Sometimes the path to wisdom comes dressed in itchy linen and a very, very loud bell. The bells from the humble walks fade behind you now like echoes in the back of your brain. The embarrassment lingers, yes, but something else steps forward with soft, sandaled feet. Something quieter, more spectral. You're no longer just an observer of flesh and blood punishment. Now you step into the realm of ghosts. Yes, ghosts. And before you panic, no, this isn't about Egyptian horror stories or jump scares. It's about how the ancient Egyptian justice system tried to discipline the dead. You heard that right, because in the land of pyramids and papyrus, the law didn't always end with your last breath. If your spirit caused trouble, say haunting a family member or interfering with temple rites, your soul could still be put on trial. And you're about to witness a posthumous prosecution. You find yourself in a small temple annex, the air thick with incense and low murmurs. A priest stands before a carved wooden figure, basically an ancient action figure with the name of a deceased man painted in red ink across its chest, Heka-ib. He's been dead for 20 years, but his name was whispered in recent dreams, and his son swears Heka-ib's spirit is breaking pots in the storeroom and whispering curses into his ear at night. So the temple court takes this seriously. Enter the ritual known as act judging. The court treats the spirit like any living defendant. A priest reads out the charges aloud facing the small statue. A second priest takes on the role of advocate for the dead. Witnesses are questioned. Was the spirit seen? Did it do mischief? Was it provoked? And now you're thinking seriously. But absolutely, this is documented in funerary texts and stelae from Deir el Medina. where families kept full records of dealing with unruly ancestors. One mainstream example: the letter to the dead, a practice where a living person writes a polite yet firm note to a deceased relative asking them to stop meddling in the mortal world, usually buried at the grave or burned in a brazier. These letters often sound like this: "Father, I honored you well. Why then do you bring harm to my barley and bring illness to my son? If you do not stop, I shall take this to the priest of Osiris." Yes, imagine threatening your own dad from beyond with legal action. It's the ultimate "I'm telling mom." The logic behind it comes from the Egyptian view of the afterlife. The dead remained among the living. They could help or they could interfere. A spirit or ache that got cranky could cause illness, crop failure, or scandal. So naturally, someone had to be responsible for making them behave. And this is where the dead courts came in. Now you're watching a symbolic trial unfold. A priest swings a censer smoke curling like ghost fingers, while another recites passages from the Book of the Dead. The aim to shame the spirit into repentance, or at least embarrassment. If that failed, they'd escalate. One path was the excommunication of the dead. That's right, you could get disowned from the underworld. Your tomb inscriptions might be scratched out, your name blurred or chipped away, your offerings stopped. You'd be cut off from the very rituals that gave your soul peace. It was the metaphysical version of being unfriended and unfed. And while you can imagine the dramatic flair here, it was deadly serious to them. Without offerings, your soul would starve in the afterlife. And if your name was erased, you simply ceased to be. Historians still argue whether these dead trials were more symbolic rituals or whether they carried legal consequences for the deceased's family. Some scholars point to records where inheritance was denied to descendants of corrupted ancestors. Others think it was more of a spiritual PR move. But either way, it wasn't all smoke and mirrors. Sometimes it got oddly bureaucratic. You step into another scene now, a dusty family home in Middle Egypt. A widow Hinit is pleading with a priest to help her with her late husband Passer, who keeps appearing in her dreams, dripping wet and angry. The priest nods and pulls out a standard complaint scroll. Describe his appearance, his words. Has he knocked anything over? Hinit, flustered, describes strange mold in the kitchen and a crack in the well. The priest frowns, possible agitation. Hinit's punishment, not for her, but for the ghost. Passer is summoned via ritual to stand trial. His name is spoken and incense is burned. Hinit reads a pre-written letter aloud, shaming him gently in front of the gods. If you are restless, let it not be among your own. Let your peace return to the field of reeds, where bread is plentiful and water flows. And if that didn't work, a clay figure bearing Passer's name would be buried in ostracizing sand, far from temples, far from family altars, left out in the desert wind. Banished spiritually, but not all ghost cases were scoldings. Some were reconciliations. Like Ipuya, a midwife who claimed her grandmother's spirit was sabotaging her clients. Rather than punish the spirit, the court recommended a re-honoring ritual. Offerings were increased, her name recarved on the tomb, a song of her deeds sung again at the Festival of the Dead, and the hauntings vanished. Justice through remembrance. Sometimes that was the goal, not punishment, but restoration. Now you're walking deeper into the past, where judges carried two kinds of scrolls, one for living disputes and one for spiritual infractions. A special division of priests, the Kari-Heb, were trained in the language of the dead. They could interpret dreams, decipher hauntings, and negotiate peace between worlds. Think of them as metaphysical lawyers. And they had tools for truth detection too. One was the mirror of accusation. The accused spirit's name would be written on a clay tablet, then placed behind a polished bronze mirror. If the mirror fogged unnaturally or reflected strange light, guilty. Another was the shadow weighing, a ritual in which a priest tracked whether a deceased person's shadow passed evenly over a series of sacred markers during dawn rites. Uneven shadow, restless soul, or just a really bad sun angle. Either way, the court considered it evidence. There's even a quirky tidbit from a lesser-known scroll in Edfu describing a woman who whispered forgiveness to her grandmother's spirit through a talking baboon statue. Why a baboon Thoth's sacred animal, of course? Did it work? The scroll simply says, her dreams turn gentle, which is both adorable and unsettling. Now don't get too cozy. This section's not all tea and offerings. Some spiritual punishments were harsh. If a ghost was truly malevolent, suspected of sorcery or causing multiple deaths, a court might sentence it to second death. This involved burning any remaining personal items, amulets, clothes, even bones if accessible, and conducting an anti-ritual, basically the opposite of a funeral. No prayers, no blessings, just the phrase "you are forgotten." And for Egyptians, that was the ultimate erasure. Worse than prison, worse than shame, a vacuum of memory. You may recall from earlier how names were vital. Spoken names kept you alive in the afterlife. And without them, oblivion. Even kings weren't immune. There's a fringe theory still debated, of course, that Akhenaten's spirit may have faced posthumous curses issued by priests loyal to the old gods. The sudden complete destruction of his legacy might not have been just political, it could have been spiritual punishment. And yet, centuries later, he's remembered again. A ghost trial overturned by time. So what do you make of all this? This quiet courtroom with no defendant to tie down. No iron bars or chisel marks, just names, memories, incense. It's strange, right? That a civilization so wrapped in ritual would extend justice to the dead. But when you think about it, it's also comforting. Because it means nothing. No word, no lie, no love is ever really gone. You shift slightly, eyes fluttering, and now you're back outside a temple wall where a boy is lighting a small fire near his grandmother's tomb. He's whispering apologies. The embers flicker. The wind dies down. Maybe she forgives him, maybe not. But the gods are listening, and that's enough. Justice in ancient Egypt didn't end at the tomb. Sometimes it began there. The wind off the Nile cools your face as you step away from that temple of the dead, but your thoughts feel heavier than before. Justice, it seems, clings to memory, like soot to stone, quiet, patient, unwilling to let even ghosts off the hook. But don't get too philosophical just yet, because now you're headed into something oddly pedestrian. You're entering the waiting rooms of ancient Egyptian justice, those long, stifling hours where ordinary people like you sat beneath reed awnings, sweating, fretting, maybe gnawing at a dried fig while waiting to be judged. And that's the kicker, most punishment in Egypt wasn't dramatic. No snakes in baskets or screaming crowds. Most of it was boring, bureaucratic, and embarrassingly petty, and yet somehow endlessly revealing. Let's begin with you, a hypothetical petty criminal. Maybe you stole a handful of lentils from your neighbor's jar. Big mistake. Not because it's the crime of the century, but because you'll have to sit through the process. First stop, a village scribe, usually stationed in a side building near the granary. He takes your complaint, or confesses it for you if you're too nervous to speak, and writes it on a thin strip of linen or palm fiber paper. You're told to wait. There is no court date. There are no chairs. Just shade if you're lucky, and flies if you're not. The accused might not even be summoned until tomorrow. So, you wait, and in that waiting, you're not alone. The people beside you aren't hardened criminals. They're shepherds, wives, tax collectors, even children. You might be shoulder to shoulder with a man accused of letting his donkey eat someone else's barley and a woman whose cousin keeps borrowing her bread oven. And while we're here, here's a mainstream historical fact for you. In Deir el Medina, a community of royal tomb builders, records survive of court cases involving disputes as small as a missing blanket or a mean-spirited nickname. That's right, you could be summoned to the court of Maat because you were too snarky. Not exactly R-rated, but still socially devastating. You overhear an old man explaining his case to a scribe. My neighbor claims I insulted his father who's been dead 10 years. But I said his father was wise but stubborn. That's not an insult, it's accurate. The scribe rolls his eyes and scribbles it down anyway. So what do these punishments actually look like? Let's start small. First tier, public scolding. No fine, no prison, just shame. A court official or priest recites your offense out loud, and everyone gets to hear it. For many, that's enough. But some punishments come with props. Ever hear of punishment steles? These were large inscribed slabs set up outside temples or administrative offices that publicly listed the names of the worst offenders in the community. Imagine a wall of shame in full view of everyone on their way to market. And yes, those names stayed there, some for years. There's a peculiar tidbit from a town near Amarna where a stele was found listing a man named Bakhtan for failing to report taxable beer. His name was inscribed right under a sun disk, which made it especially awkward because people literally bowed toward that stele during certain rituals. So he got scolded and accidentally worshipped at the same time. Justice in Egypt didn't always have neat lines. Let's say your crime was more physical. Say you got into a scuffle in the granary line. Then comes the second tier of punishment, temporary restraint. This wasn't prison in the modern sense. Egypt didn't build sprawling jailhouses. They didn't need to. You were punished, then sent back into society, hopefully changed. So instead, you'd be tied up, literally. A reed rope would be wrapped around your arms and ankles in specific configurations, often just tight enough to be uncomfortable. You'd be left in a courtyard or side chamber sometimes for hours, sometimes a full day. Some ropes were dyed red, a symbolic color for guilt, chaos, and danger. And here's a clever detail. Historians still debate whether some of these rope bindings had spiritual significance. Were they designed to prevent not just escape, but also bad intentions? Some think the knots were patterned after the binding spells found in protective amulets. You're not just restrained, you're neutralized. Quirky enough for you? Let's push it one step further. Imagine you're convicted of stealing temple property, let's say a votive loaf offered to a minor household god. Silly maybe, but considered sacrilege. Your punishment, forced temple labor, a few weeks of cleaning, hauling, possibly polishing offering plates until they reflect your shame right back at you. And before you ask, no, there's no community service badge or Instagram story to document it. Just sore muscles and the occasional priest giving you the stink eye. Interestingly, in some temples, offenders wore symbolic headdresses while they worked, a kind of woven cloth square that marked you as a mortal in correction, like a cone of shame, but less breathable. Here's where it gets even more tedious yet fascinating. Let's say someone in your family messes up. Not you personally, just your annoying cousin who can't stop insulting people at harvest festivals. The village court may still fine your entire household. That's right. In Egypt, the family unit was seen as a kind of moral cluster. If one person violated communal peace, the entire group might suffer a small punishment. That might mean sharing a portion of your grain yield with the local granary, or losing first dibs on irrigation water for one season. Not fun. You can't help but wonder, would that make families better at self-policing, or just way more passive-aggressive? And here comes a whisper of modernity. Court scribes often kept detailed records of repeat offenders. So yes, there were usual suspects. Villagers who'd been through the system so many times, they were basically on a first-name basis with the temple guards. One man, Pahemnetcher, shows up in over a dozen minor cases in Deir el Medina records. Everything from goat-related trespassing to repeated lateness in brick delivery, which, let's be honest, sounds like ancient Egyptian Uber Eats. Eventually, Pahemnetcher was sentenced to the delightful penalty of public work chant leading. No joke, he had to lead call and response chants while people dragged limestone blocks up a slope, loudly, for weeks. Why? To exhaust him, to humiliate him, and to possibly teach rhythm and responsibility. Punishment, but with musical flair. But now, let's shift perspective. You're not the accused. You're a spectator, watching this whole thing unfold from the side of the courtyard, maybe while chewing date cakes, or fanning yourself with a strip of woven papyrus. And, weirdly, you kind of enjoy it. Not because you're cruel, but because public punishment in these boring, bureaucratic forms became a kind of theater, a low-stakes performance that reminded people, hey, maybe don't steal that barley, or you'll end up sweeping temple floors with Bakhtan. Even the priests leaned into this. Some scribes were known for adding flourish to punishment announcements. A case from Elephantine Island records a trial where a priest mocked a thief by reciting the charges in verse, complete with rhymes about stolen honey and hands that stick like bees. So yes, even the law had a sense of humor. And speaking of laughter, did you know certain punishments involved mock costumes? This was reserved for truly annoying offenses, repeated lying, petty gossip, or disruption of rituals. The guilty party would be made to wear a donkey tail wig, a symbolic reference to Set, the god of chaos. They'd be walked through town. No physical harm, just a slow, humiliating trot. The lesson chaos brings consequence. And if you're wondering whether they ever used actual donkeys for this, yes. Occasionally, offenders were tied backwards on a donkey and paraded through town while people tossed husks or mud clods. Nothing fatal, just enough to ruin your day and your social calendar. So what does all this boring punishment teach us? That ancient Egyptian justice was in many ways a slow burn. It wasn't designed for revenge. It wasn't flashy. It was a slow drip faucet of consequence. Most punishments public, mildly uncomfortable, intensely embarrassing. And that was the point. Make you sit in your discomfort, not just stew in a jail cell. Make your name the headline at the market. Make your misdeeds stick not as a scar, but as a story. It's bedtime now, but your eyes are still open, picturing yourself standing barefoot before a priest in a red sash, holding a papyrus scroll, like it's the menu of your shame. He reads it out, slowly, rhythmically. You bow your head. You hear laughter behind you, maybe some sympathy, maybe a little pity, but mostly boredom, because justice in this corner of Egypt doesn't snap like a whip. It simmers, stretches, and waits for you to admit that yes, you did steal that honey loaf. And no, it wasn't worth the donkey wig. Your feet ache from standing, but the court has no chairs. You're shifting your weight back and forth, eyes darting to the scribe in the corner, wondering if your name will be called soon or if you'll have to return tomorrow. Again, you'd think by now that ancient Egyptian punishments had run out of surprises. But you're wrong, because tonight things get weirder. Let's talk about the symbolic punishments, the kind that make you question whether the goal was correction or some elaborate social theater. Start with this charming example, forced apologies to inanimate objects. No, seriously. If you defiled a ritual space, maybe knocked over a ceremonial pot, or spilled sacred oil, you might be made to speak an apology directly to the object with witnesses present. Imagine bowing before a shattered jar and solemnly declaring, "I regret what I have done." You held perfume, now you hold shame. Cue the stifled laughter, but the ritual was serious. Because in Egyptian theology, objects weren't just tools, they had purpose, memory, sometimes even K, a sort of essence or spirit. So you're not just apologizing to clay, you're apologizing to the sacred. If the object had been dedicated to a deity, especially ones like Hathor or Bastet, the apology could include burnt offerings accompanied by readings of hymns. Think courtroom meets Broadway matinee. Here's a quirky tidbit. In one preserved scroll, a man named Peneb, yes, that Peneb, the wildly controversial foreman of Deir el-Medina, was allegedly forced to recite a hymn of reconciliation to a damaged doorway. A literal doorway. Why? Because he banged it open too hard during a festival procession. No lasting damage, just bad vibes. But still, formal repentance required. Which leads to a bigger idea. In Egypt, punishment wasn't always about you. It was about balance, cosmic equilibrium. Ma'at, the goddess of truth and order, wasn't just a concept, she was the reason the sun rose and your crops didn't explode into locusts. So if you upset that balance, you had to restore it. Sometimes this took the form of ritual purification, a kind of spiritual reset button. You'd be ordered to bathe in sacred water, usually from a temple basin, then wear linen garments for several days while avoiding beer meat or any form of pleasure. Basically a holiness detox with sandals. There's even a record of one particularly nosy potter who gossiped during a burial procession and was sentenced to a full week of ritual cleansing and strict silence. Imagine surviving the desert sun with nothing but holy water and your own thoughts. And speaking of thoughts, let's wander into the realm of trial by dream. Yes, this was a thing. If a case couldn't be resolved, say two parties gave equally convincing testimony, and there were no witnesses, the local priest might declare a dream judgment. One or both parties would sleep in a designated space in the temple, often near a statue of a deity. Offerings were made, incense burned, and then they slept. Alone, watched over by a junior priest or scribe. In the morning, the dream was reported. A snake in the dream, bad omen. A flooded field, maybe renewal. An empty granary, probably guilt. Now here's the juicy part. Historians still argue whether these dreams were staged. Did the priests interpret actual dreams? Or did they receive divine messages conveniently pointing toward a verdict they already favored? We'll never know. But either way, imagine having your fate decided by something you mumbled at 3 a.m. in your sleep. Did you see a cow? Yeah, I think so. Guilty. Wait, what? Let's get even stranger. Because there was a class of punishment that bordered on performance art. You steal something minor, a votive loaf perhaps, but from the wrong person, a priest, or worse, a scribe. Now you're sentenced to symbolic reversal. You're ordered to walk backward through the village at sunset holding the item you tried to steal. You wear a sash, reading "He who walks wrong." The symbolism that your actions reversed the natural order, so now you must reverse yourself. Kids point, elders scoff, dogs bark, someone throws an onion. You keep walking, backwards. And the best part, you're expected to narrate your journey as you go. That's right, you're supposed to say things like, "I return what I should not have taken, and let Ma'at unbend the river of my soul." No one's stopping you from being poetic. One man, an especially dramatic baker's apprentice, was said to sing his apology backwards, in rhyming couplets. He was later offered a position in a temple choir. So see, even shame can be a stepping stone. Let's pause and review the practical wisdom behind this. Symbolic punishments like these, bizarre as they seem, served a powerful function. They reinforced religious order, entertained and engaged the community, let minor offenders redeem themselves without violence or exile. It was, in its way, therapeutic. Now let's zoom into another peculiar feature, animal-related punishments. We've already met donkey wigs and goat-related trespasses, but get ready for this. If you insulted a deity known for animal symbolism like Thoth, Ibis Sobek crocodile, or Sekhmet lion, you could be sentenced to caretaker duty. Imagine cleaning the ibis pens at a temple aviary, feeding spoiled dates to crocodiles in a muddy canal, collecting lion figurines for temple processions, and anointing them with oil. There's a record from Kam Ambo of a young man sentenced to 30 days of crocodile dung compost stirring. Why? Because he mocked the priest during a Sobek festival. You might remember Sobek, our favorite toothy god from earlier sections. His worship included actual crocodiles kept in temple pools. They were bathed, fed, and dressed in jewelry. Mocking Sobek wasn't just bad form, it was inviting bad luck. So, this poor fellow had to reestablish harmony by tending to the least pleasant part of crocodile life. There's also speculation that certain animal punishments were a form of deterrent psychology. If you had to live among the sacred creatures you offended, maybe you'd learn to respect them. Or maybe you'd just leave smelling like dung. Either way, lesson learned. One final quirk on this front public repentance scrolls. Offenders, especially scribes, merchants, or anyone literate, might be ordered to write out a personal confession and apology to be posted on the community board or outer temple wall. It had to be poetic too. Something like, "I wronged my neighbor in the light of Ra, and I seek no darkness to hide my shame. Let my hand be more honest than my mouth." If the writing was subpar, the scribe would send it back and say, "Try again." More humility this time. So justice in Egypt less about brutality, more about narrative. And still behind all of this pageantry and performance, there was the steady beat of something more serious, spiritual fear. Because while earthly punishments might be mild ropes, apologies, donkey wigs, the real dread came from what might await you in the afterlife. You remember the weighing of the heart. Every punishment in life was a chance to tip the scales in the right direction before you got there. So the symbolic was never just symbolic. It was an investment in your post-mortem reputation, a way of saying, yes, I was an idiot with that honey loaf, but look, I paid my dues. In song, backward. Even your funeral could be affected. If your crimes were never resolved, priests could refuse to include your name in certain rites. You'd still be buried, but not as well, which for an Egyptian was terrifying. So in a sense, punishment wasn't just a sentence, it was a script revision. One more chance to nudge the gods into thinking well of you, to get your name back on track, to make Ma'at smile. You shift again on the stone bench. You've heard a dozen confessions today, watched 2 donkey parades, and listened to an old woman sing a repentance scroll like a lullaby. Somewhere nearby, incense curls through the air. The sun is lowering itself toward the Nile, bleeding orange and gold into the courtyard walls. You wonder if you made one small mistake, would you be forgiven? And would your punishment make a good story? In Egypt, that might be all the same thing. The sun has dipped below the palm groves, and the temple shadows stretch long across the stone court. The air is thick with the perfume of myrrh, the kind that clings to your hair for days and makes you smell like divine judgment and dry funerals. You shift again, still waiting, because in ancient Egypt, the court doesn't close until everyone has had their say. And tonight, it's all about magical punishments. You wouldn't think spells would make it into the justice system, but here, where gods walk in temple corridors and amulets carry legal weight, magical remedies for criminal behavior were not just real, they were enforceable. Let's start with the curse of the unblinking eye. Used on repeat offenders, especially thieves or liars, this punishment was part psychological warfare, part theatrical curse. The accused would be brought to a small shrine, often within the precinct of a temple, and forced to stand beneath an image of the Eye of Horus, freshly painted and illuminated by oil lamps. A priest or magical practitioner, sometimes both, would chant a binding spell invoking the eye to watch without rest, so that the criminal's soul would find no peace, no privacy, no comfort. The punishment wasn't physical, but the person believed they were being watched constantly. People reported insomnia visions and anxiety. You might laugh now, but consider ancient Egypt belief could manifest reality. Some even reported the eye following them in dreams. And if that didn't straighten you out, well, then came name binding. This one gets creepy, because names in Egyptian belief held power. Your name was tied to your identity, your soul, your memory after death. So a judge or priest could sentence you to a partial erasure of your name. They wouldn't kill you, but they'd take a reed pen and strike out just part of your name on official temple lists. A syllable gone, a consonant missing. Your name sounded strange when spoken aloud, incomplete when chanted. People hesitated when they said it. You hesitated hearing it. Imagine someone calling your name and you barely recognize it, like the sound got dusty. That was your punishment. Mainstream historians agree this happened at least in temple records, but fringe scholars suggest it went further, maybe even name distortions whispered during rituals to spiritually blur the offender. And while we're already spiraling, let's talk forced amulet duty. In cases where a crime was minor, but repeated like gossiping laziness or overboiling temple beer, yes, that's a real charge, the sentence might involve making or carrying a magical amulet with an ironic twist. You overboiled beer. Now you carry an amulet shaped like a broken beer jar, engraved with a prayer to contain thy heat and thy tongue for a month. You gossiped. You wore a wax scarab around your neck, etched with hieroglyphs for closed mouth and truth in silence. Each time someone looked at it, they knew what you'd done. It's petty, it's specific, it's very Egyptian. Amulets were powerful symbols, but also incredibly personal, so making them a source of mild public shame turned punishment into a walking lesson. And speaking of walking lessons, remember the public scroll confessions from earlier? Well, there's a magical version of that too, the ritual of undoing. This involved the offender writing out what they had done, not as an apology, but as a magical admission on papyrus. Then the scroll was folded tied with a red thread and burned in a censer before a minor deity, often Thoth or Maat. The smoke, they believed, carried the confession to the netherworld. If accepted, the gods might undo the cosmic disruption caused by the act. Here's a mainstream historical fact: these burning rituals actually show up in late-period temple texts and have parallels in Coptic Christian practices centuries later. What we don't know is whether everyone truly believed they worked or if they were more symbolic. Historians still argue whether the ritual of undoing was a reset button for one soul or just elaborate spiritual theater for a crowd in need of closure. Let's move on to a more intense use of name magic ostraca inscription punishments. Ostraca shards of pottery or stone used for everyday writing weren't just used for shopping lists and tax notes. They could also record permanent shame. If you committed a significant crime but not one deserving death or exile, your name might be inscribed onto dozens of ostraca and buried under the floor of the court or temple where the crime was judged, so that every time someone stepped there, they unknowingly stepped on your reputation. It's poetic, it's passive-aggressive, it's eternal. Some archaeologists have even found clusters of ostraca under former court floors with names like Bekemet, breaker of seals, or Cherry, who lied of grain, and they weren't all criminals. Some were officials who fell out of favor, which tells you something deeply Egyptian. Death wasn't the worst thing. Being remembered wrong or not remembered at all is. And now, dear listener, we glide to enforced offerings. You may think mandatory donations aren't a punishment, but imagine this: you've just been caught swindling incense weights. Your sentence: you must now deliver a full bundle of myrrh to the temple every full moon for the next year. No skipping, no substitutions. Miss a month, the penalty increases. Offerings had to be pure, untainted, and sourced correctly. The priest checked. One record tells of a fisherman who tried to cheat his monthly oil quota by mixing in river water. His new sentence, 3 months of temple latrine ash disposal. Which, if you've never seen one, picture a massive stone outhouse in a desert climate with questionable shade coverage. So yes, they would find a way to escalate things. We also have examples of ritual reenactments used for punishment. Say you interfered with a religious ceremony, maybe shouted something rude during a sacred chant, or let a donkey wander into a funeral rite, again, real case. Your punishment, you'd have to act out the entire disrupted ceremony later alone, in full costume, often with an audience. One poor brewer was forced to dress as Osiris and lie in a sarcophagus, while temple novices recited 47 verses of the opening of the mouth ceremony over him. It took 4 hours. He wept during verse 19. Reportedly, these reenactments weren't just humiliating. They were meant to restore the flow of divine ritual, the flow you'd disrupted. Still awkward to be an Osiris who sneezes. Now let's sneak into darker territory: inverted spells. Magic wasn't always used to protect or bless. Sometimes a priest could be asked to perform a binding spell against you if the court judged that you posed an ongoing spiritual risk. These spells weren't about violence, but about limitation. They might bind your dreams, dampen your charisma, or suppress your tongue in moments of temptation. To the modern ear, that sounds theatrical, but remember, people believed it worked. In one case, a market woman accused of constant verbal harassment was bound by spell to let her voice crack in anger and her lies dry in the throat like unbaked clay. Did it work? We don't know. But afterward, witnesses claimed she went strangely quiet. Could be psychosomatic, could be dramatic social pressure, or maybe, just maybe, you shuffle again on the bench. A boy walks past with a bundle of reeds and honey cakes. He glances toward the judge's seat and whispers a prayer under his breath. Everyone's watching what they say, because magic here is never just hocus pocus. It's social enforcement cloaked in divine language. And what if you rebelled? What if you defied the court or refused a magical punishment? Well, then you might face the silencing of the Bay, a deeply feared sentence. The Bay was your soul as personality, your essence that traveled between worlds. If you resisted penance, the priest could threaten or perform a ceremony of silencing. They wouldn't kill you, but they'd isolate you from sacred spaces, deny you participation in rituals, and have your name excluded from the seasonal ancestor lists. To Egyptians, this was almost as bad as death, a kind of social unbeing. You could walk and talk, but the community would act like your spiritual self had been severed. Your memory would be closed. And yet, if you repented, if you did what was asked, balance could return. Because the point of these magical punishments wasn't cruelty, it was cosmic cleanup. A way to sweep up the spiritual dust you'd kicked into the corners of the world. So now, as the last sliver of sun vanishes and the priests begin to chant under the moonlight, you breathe a little slower. The eye of Horus gleams from its painted niche. You wonder, if you dream tonight, what will you see? And if your name were written on an ostracon, would the gods still remember it kindly? You wake up to the dull clink of bronze vessels being cleaned nearby, a soft splash of water echoing against the stone basin, and a breeze that carries the scent of crushed lotus petals and faint regret. You're still here, still in the long stone shadow of justice. Except now, we've reached one of the most dreaded corners of ancient Egyptian punishment, the ones that weren't loud, dramatic, or deadly, but lingered. We're talking about punishments that lasted beyond death. Imagine being sentenced not just for this life, but for the next one too. Let's begin with grave relocation. And no, not like a fancy reburial. This was a punishment handed down to those whose crimes were seen as too dangerous for the realm of the dead to tolerate. Grave relocation wasn't always physical. Sometimes it meant a public decree that your burial location had to be forgotten unmarked or moved by decree in records. They might not dig you up, but you'd be erased from temple death registers, your tomb excluded from the annual offerings. Other times, more rare and very real, they did literally move your remains. In one known case, the body of an official accused posthumously of mismanaging grain rations was removed from his tomb and placed in a communal pit for unclaimed dead with no markers, no prayers, no nameplate. Now imagine that in a culture obsessed with afterlife geography, you didn't just lose your address, you lost your map to the eternal picnic. Mainstream archaeologists have verified such tomb alterations in a few sites, yet historians still argue whether these were actual judicial acts or political cleansings after regime shifts. Maybe a bit of both. Either way, if the judgment followed you after death, it was serious. Next up, selective mummification denial. This one's grim. Mummification was more than a burial process. It was how your soul found its way to the next world. Denial of mummification was to Egyptians like being erased from the map of existence. If someone committed an act that disrupted Ma'at, the cosmic order, so thoroughly that no redemption seemed possible, their family could be banned from preparing their body. Sometimes it meant a state prohibition. Other times it meant being buried hastily, improperly, or left partially exposed. Not exactly the image you want on your spiritual passport. And the horror wasn't just social. Egyptians believed an improperly embalmed body could confuse or trap the Ka, the life force leading to spiritual wanderings. One fringe theory, that ghost sightings in certain temple districts were linked to improperly punished criminals who'd been denied proper rites. You laugh, but just a little. Now let's talk about punitive reinscription. Sometimes punishment came in the form of altering your past. A scribe working with temple records could be ordered to go back and adjust official scrolls or wall inscriptions. Your name might be shrunken, pushed to the margins, or replaced entirely with shame titles like "He Who Betrayed Trust" or "False of Voice." You can still see some of these today, tiny footnote-style notations on burial texts where names appear awkwardly inserted or scratched over. There's one known case where a temple clerk had his title changed from overseer of offerings to remover of bread, a sarcastic jab at accusations he stole from food donations meant for the poor. You might still be remembered, just not how you hoped. And then comes the truly chilling sentence, false afterlife narratives. This was a rare but poetic punishment, where a condemned criminal would be assigned a false book of the dead, a version of the afterlife instructions, with errors intentionally placed. Imagine opening a GPS app and it guides you directly into a swamp. One papyrus found in a late-period burial included a reversed set of spells mixing directions to the field of reeds with rites meant for embalming. The theory, it was punishment. The person wasn't supposed to make it. Of course, there's debate. Some scholars argue the errors were just scribal mistakes, but others suggest it was a planned misguiding, a karmic detour delivered in ink. You run your fingers along a cool stone, and it buzzes with meaning. Because the Egyptians had a word for all of this hefet, sin, or more precisely, that which disrupts balance. And if your hefet was severe enough, even the gods might turn their backs. Let's pivot to a different but related theme, posthumous court trials. Yep, even the dead weren't off the hook. If someone was suspected of wrongdoing but died before a verdict could be reached, the court might hold a ritual trial anyway. A priest or family member would stand in for the deceased, sometimes using a wax figure representing the person in question. Arguments would be heard, evidence reviewed, and if guilt was confirmed, punishment could still be handed down, especially those targeting the memory or legacy of the accused. Imagine your cousin standing in court holding a candle shaped like you, while a temple scribe declares your name removed from the festival lists. Harsh, yes, but somehow satisfyingly dramatic. And what about the innocent? Sometimes these trials were held to clear someone's name posthumously, especially important if that person had been denied proper rites. A successful trial could restore their burial rights even decades later. So no, it wasn't always about vengeance. Sometimes it was cosmic reparation. Let's pause for a moment and drift to something quieter. Symbolic animal replacement punishments. This one is weird and oddly gentle. For crimes that involved spiritual impurity or offense to nature, the court might assign a symbolic stand-in, an animal statue, or small idol that absorbed the criminal's impurity. The statue was then ritually buried broken or left in a temple courtyard for exposure. Imagine committing fraud and being sentenced to fund the carving of a small wooden ibis, which then receives a farewell spell and a symbolic burial. You're purified in theory because the ibis took the hit on your behalf. Mainstream sources do mention these substitutions, especially in medical magical texts, but the boundary between symbolism and literal belief is always fuzzy. Another eerie punishment, the silence rite. This was used on individuals known for deception slander or abuse of speech. The court would hold a ritual in which the person sat in a chamber with no speech allowed for a full day or more. Sometimes they'd be blindfolded too. A priest might chant around them, but they were forbidden to respond. The idea was that silence would retrain the mouth and calm the chaos they'd caused. It wasn't torture, it was correction, ancient ASMR if you like. But it was also boring and discomforting, and for some, transformative. There's even a love poem fragment from a woman who said she fell for a man after watching him serve silence because he returned from it softer than the moonlight on a fig. So there's that. Still, not all punishments were heavy. Some were cosmic jokes in ritual form. If your crime involved arrogance or mocking the gods, you might be made to play a fool in a minor festival as a priest. A fake ceremony would be arranged where you'd offer bread to a carved goat, while others chanted exaggerated verses behind you. The goal, humbling through divine satire. There's a record of a man accused of impersonating a priest to get free food. His punishment: he had to play the role of high priest of the empty bowl during the moon feast, offering invisible food to invisible deities while children laughed. Justice with punchlines. But let's close with something deeper: the punishment of forgetting. This one is subtle and terrifying. If the court deemed someone unworthy of legacy, not evil enough for full erasure, but not decent enough for remembrance, they could be left off the records. No name carved, no mention in the seasonal scrolls, no voice in the songs. You simply slipped away. It was like being muted in a room that never stopped talking. And in Egypt, where memory kept souls alive, this was worse than exile, worse than death. It was quiet unmaking. So you sit there under the flickering torchlight, thinking about how these people not so different from us feared being forgotten even more than being punished. They feared chaos, yes, but more than that, they feared insignificance. You brush a finger along the floor. Somewhere below, an ostracon waits. Maybe it holds someone's shame, or maybe it holds nothing, because someone was too unremarkable to deserve even that. Strange, isn't it? How justice can be loud or whispered. And here in the land of gods and jackals, both are equally real. The room is darker now. Only a faint, flickering glow lingers from the torch stub, and the stone around you feels less like architecture and more like time itself. Heavy, quiet, endless. You've made it to the final corridor of punishment in ancient Egypt, a corridor with no clear walls, no rigid rules, no satisfying finale, because tonight's final descent is into the futility and fragility of law itself. That's right. You've seen the crocodile masks, the false afterlife maps, the amputated noses, and goat-shaped humiliation rituals. But what if some of it never worked? Or worse, what if it only looked like it did? We start in a courtroom, but not the grand temple variety. This one is dusty, small, near the Nile marshes. You're in a regional town. The judge is a part-time grain auditor. The accused is a farmer accused of failing to share irrigation fairly. His neighbor, possibly jealous, has filed the complaint. The judge listens. The accused argues. A fine is issued. But what happens after? This is where Egyptian punishment loses its clean lines, because unlike in the idealized records of Thebes or Memphis, most everyday cases didn't result in formal punishment. They resulted in agreements, or better yet, nodding, documented or not. One study of rural trial records shows that more than half end with mutual oaths, often sealed with a simple "he has spoken truly" stamp. No beatings, no exile, just the ritual of resolution. Which leads to our first unsettling idea that most punishment in ancient Egypt may have been performative. A necessary theater to preserve the illusion of Mayat cosmic order, not because justice was always served, but because the people had to believe it could be. And yet there were systems. Ostraca detailing scribal thefts, temple tablets tracking fines for tax evasion, letters from village elders requesting a court scribe to settle marriage disputes. But in all this order, chaos seeped through, especially where power mixed with piety. Let's talk about punishment by paperwork. No, seriously, this was a thing. Imagine you're an apprentice scribe. You've spilled ink on a precious scroll or miscopied a list of temple donors. You're not whipped. You're not dismissed. You're sentenced to copy the same hymn 1,000 times. There are fragments of scrolls in museum archives today where the same 6-line praise to Ptah is repeated over and over, line after line, with increasing messiness as the poor writer's hand grows tired. The hymn reads, "May Ta bless my ink, may my script bring order, may I not again spill the names of gods." It's like an ancient detention slip, a spiritual timeout. And if you think that's mild, try the Wheel of Trials. This isn't a literal wheel despite the dramatic name. It's a modern term for the way punishments were rotated between different deities' temples depending on the crime. Steal from a fisherman. Go to the crocodile priests of Sobek. Insult a scribe sent to Thoth's temple to be educated in humility. Insult the pharaoh's mother. Ooh! You're headed straight to Hathor's quarters, where priestesses specialize in reputation restoration, often through public apologies performed in awkward poetry. That's right, you might be forced to write and recite a poem praising the woman you offended. Rhyming optional, redemption not guaranteed. And yet, while that seems gentle, the implications were deep. Because these punishments weren't just social correction, they were cosmic balancing acts. The Egyptians didn't just want justice, they wanted harmony. They believed wrongdoing echoed into the world, disrupting floods, inviting disease, angering spirits. So punishment wasn't revenge, it was tuning. Like adjusting the strings of a divine harp. Still not all strings sounded sweet. Sometimes punishment came from failure to be punished. Here's what that means: if someone committed a crime and wasn't publicly corrected, then everyone else risked consequence. A family could be punished for not reporting their criminal son. A scribe's team might be fined because one of them hid an error. A whole village might be denied ceremonial blessings if they failed to hand over a local thief. So, imagine this. You live next to a guy who's clearly cooking the wheat records, but if you report him, he's your cousin. If you don't, no harvest festival for your entire street. Talk about awkward dinner conversations. And so we stumble into one of the final Egyptian punishments, collective guilt. It shows up in temple records where whole communities are listed under the shadow of a crime. The village of Wetbast failed to honor contract, or all households south of the Reed Grove shall offer penance. Penance A tax an extra labor duty, or more commonly being denied temple access for a week. In a theocratic society, that was no joke. It meant missing prayers offerings and, yes, free bread. But we can't end without confronting a final complex truth: Egyptian punishment wasn't equal. Class mattered, wealth mattered, so did proximity to divine favor. A noble caught stealing grain might get fined. A farmer doing the same might lose a hand. The son of a priest could be sent to meditate in a sacred library. A peasant child might be sent to clean canals. Even the gods had favorites, and this inequality wasn't hidden, it was ritualized, justified. You see it in wall inscriptions where pharaohs boast about tempering punishment with mercy when dealing with high-born traitors. You sigh. Of course they did. But still, there were moments when justice punched up. One of the rare surviving records from the 20th dynasty details how a group of laborers, the tomb builders of Deir el-Medina, went on strike. Yes, an actual strike. They stopped work and demanded delayed wages, bread, beer, soap. And the state responded, not with punishment, but with negotiation. The workers returned to their tools after receiving full back pay and assurances. Which leads to our final twist: sometimes resistance worked. Even in a system bound in incense and scrolls and golden thrones, a few men with calloused hands and empty bellies changed the tune. You sit back. The chamber is still. You can almost hear the scratching of reed pens in some far-off scribal office documenting yet another petty theft or exoneration or crocodile-bitten rumor. The point is, ancient Egyptian justice wasn't just about crime and punishment. It was about balance and imbalance. Chaos held at bay through ritual. Not always fair, not always clear, but deeply believed. And in a world where the sun had to be reborn every morning, and where your soul had to navigate 42 questions to reach paradise, belief was everything. So, you stretch your limbs. The journey is ending. You've made it through the cartouche's curses and courtroom drama. And as the soft hum of imagined temple bells begins to fade, you realize there are no perfect systems, but there are fascinating ones. And in the land of pharaohs and feather-weighted hearts, even punishment had poetry. You're lying still now, the story behind you, like footprints vanishing in soft sand. The voices of judges, scribes, and whispering priests have all quieted, folded gently back into time. Let your breath slow. You're safe, and the torches have gone out. There is no more need to weigh your heart tonight. You've traveled a long way through stone courtyards under incense-draped colonnades across dusty courtrooms where gods sat in judgment and men played their roles with trembling hands. Let it all soften now. Imagine the cool walls of a tomb around you not as a prison, but as a gentle silence. Nothing chases you. Nothing waits. Even the loudest punishments fade when time moves like this slow, warm, endless. Let the gold-leafed paintings on the walls blur. Let your name be remembered only by the breeze moving through ancient reeds. The Nile flows quietly somewhere far away, its surface catching moonlight that no longer concerns itself with judgment. You are no longer in the courtroom. You are beyond it. Past verdict, past mistake, past noise. Tonight, no balance needs restoring. There is no scroll to write. You did enough just by listening. So, drift gently. Let the last torch in your mind flicker out, leaving only comfort and breath. No one here will deny you your peace. You've survived the strange, slow world of ancient punishments. You've done well. And now let the silence carry you forward.